Welcome, folks. We're opening the waiting room a few minutes early so you can get settled and comfortable, come in out of the cold. And we will certainly start right on time. It's nice to see some people this time around. We get lonely here, so thank you for clicking your video on, folks. Especially old friends. Hi, Ron.
This has certainly been a new experience for me, the Zoom and all the other vehicles that we have meetings with, Turnpike, PennDOT, and others. It's been a learning curve, but a good one.
It's a steep one, indeed.
Yeah.
We were learning on the fly last week, or last meeting, as you know, Ted.
Yeah.
All right, just a few minutes to go before we are live. So we have, thanks, Dave. We have a note there that the public link is not working. Shane, are you and Larissa maybe aware of that? Dave got that from one of his contacts. It's saying that the public link doesn't work. A meeting ended April 12.
Okay, it appears to be working on my end, but let me look into that. Thank you.
I was going to say, is the meeting maybe just not live yet? It's waiting to cast, or?
Yeah, we can open that up.
I bet that was what it was.
Yeah, it's possible I hadn't started it yet, but it should be started now. I added the link over into the chat box for all of you in case you want to check it out yourself or share it.
Yes, I will not dare to do that lest I not be able to find my way back. I see 1 o'clock came on my new watch. Delighted that you could be with us, commission members. We welcome as well members of the public, probably members of the press as well. My name is Paul Caulfield. I will serve as facilitator today, as will my friend and colleague Keith Chase, as we get a little deeper into the program. At this stage, you should be seeing my PowerPoint. I would invite you, if you happen to have any other, if you can just mute, please. I'm picking up some echoes right from the start, but please, we want to encourage you to unmute and speak with us at the appropriate time. Want to let you know that we welcome members of the public. The public folks, just kind of address that first. You may make comments that will certainly be recorded and we will take into account with the commission members by the feature that offers ask a question. So if you don't have to ask a question, you can make a comment there throughout the session. We're not going to try to keep up with those in real time. But if you use that ask a question feature, and then members of the public, again, if you could only join by phone and want to make a public comment, we're making an attempt to reserve some time at the end of today's meeting, just about 10 or so minutes as we can afford it. And we're going to invite you to talk at that time if you're a member of the public and you could only connect by phone and did not have access to that other avenue of input. We will ask you to restrict your time to 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll have the unenviable job of having to push you off if you go any longer than that. So I'm going to cover a few other elements of navigation because we have made a switch to the Zoom platform. Some of you have probably been living and doing business on Zoom for some time, but right now you'll just see it's actually a slide. So don't panic that says navigating Zoom. When you want to speak with us, somewhere down there around the bottom left, you can unmute and do so. We would love to see you. It's great to see some folks already. So you can start your video. If you wish to toggle between a speaker view and see all the other folks, you may do so with that speaker view icon top right. We would invite you now to click on the chat, and that's my reminder that I have placed a Mentimeter link. It should be the first chat that's there, first chat that came in. It's not quite as fancy as last time around. We will get to that in time, but that's already live. So you'll want to open the chat. You'll want to open participants as well, and they'll find their way probably to the right side of your screen when they kind of uncouple. That will help us also when we come to raising hands. It comes out a couple of ways in Zoom, so use the buttons to participate. So if you have to click more to get that second set of buttons, or even down where it says reactions, because it looks a couple of different ways on different versions here, you'll see the raise hand. You don't have to send us any hearts or thumbs up. You may if you like, but the main thing is to be able to raise the hand so we can recognize folks kind of in the order in which they came in. You may even get a more populous icon there when you look at those reactions. So also we'd like to just recount information that you have received. It has not been insignificant. You saw the meeting minutes, we'll call it a draft until approved from the last session. We're really keeping those rather bare bones. They're just about the process we went through. Most of the information that's coming out is in these other kinds of packages that have come out. So we took all your input, which was voluminous, and we affinity grouped it. And that came back out. That just is a fancy term for captured some themes from all of your fine input. As well, the department has done a great job of capturing all the Q's and turned them into A's. So the Q&A responses have come back out to folks, as has the requested look at other states' funding practices. There's also the efficiencies report and the meeting agenda for today. Speaking of which, the meeting agenda for today is we're going to jump into objectives and hear from our commission chair and PennDOT secretary. Then we'll do a quick look at our milestone review, a real quick meeting recap, but we want to turn the corner today into looking at the T-Roc survey results. So we'll take a look at all the information that came in. That's just a starting point. It just stirs up our thought process relative to what's on people's minds, what they think ought to be a priority option to consider. And we'll really work through some scenarios and start down the road of evaluating and maybe starting to shape ideas that may find their way into your final recommendations. It's not really that far off. We'll wrap it up and have some public comment as mentioned before, and then the commission chair's closing as well. Our objectives: review that data from the survey, initially assess the level of support and then the impact that the different options would have on addressing funding needs. And then we'll engage the commission members in really helping to determine those funding options they think have the greatest potential for success. And we'll be very open on that. Lots of Mentimeter input, lots of unmute, maybe even show your video input so we can really understand your perspective. With that, I will turn it over to Secretary Gramian.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting of the Transportation Revenue Options Commission, or T-Roc. Thank you all for your engagement during the last meeting, as well as taking the time to complete the survey that was sent out last week. As Paul mentioned during today's meeting, we will take some time to recap our meeting on March 25th, including the results of the Mentimeter polls and schedule. This is the first of many opportunities for you, the members, to share your ideas. I'm looking forward to hearing the results of the survey and discussing them. This will be the focus of today's meeting. I'm also encouraged that several members have asked how they can support achieving the T-Roc mission as set forth in the governor's executive order. Clearly, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to make a positive impact on Pennsylvania transportation for decades to come. As we work through our initial evaluation of various options today, I would ask you to reflect on ways we can join in support of the T-Roc's work in making some of these options a reality. I will share my thoughts on this when we close the session. Now, before we get started on the first order of business, my first order of business, is to approve the minutes from our last meeting. So I'm asking if I have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
And who is that?
Leanne Sherman.
Thank you, Leanne. Do I have a second?
I second.
And who's that?
It's Patricia Cowley from PBA.
Thank you, Patricia. Is there any discussion? I hear none. Does anyone oppose to carry the motion? I hear none. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Paul, back to you.
Thank you, Secretary. Nice to get some parliamentary procedure out of the way. A quick look ahead. Here we are, and we have made it into April. This is all about generating and evaluating options. Some of them have already perhaps been on the table, but based on survey results, there are a lot of other options for us to take a look at. We are looking ahead to May already, and we're looking at May 13 and 27. It looks like we will settle on those dates, staying on our Thursday theme to work together as commission members. And then you can just kind of see that we really will have to start to turn the corner in May to saying what indeed will be a recommendation, and in June to really refine, to shape up, build the rationale for those recommendations, and just lay out the rest of the whole proposal, which will probably revisit the need and so forth. In July, that's when it all comes together. So that's the fast pace that we are on. And I am delighted to turn it over to Keith Chase to talk through a little bit of our first meeting, and we're going to breeze through that kind of quickly, Keith.
Thank you, Paul. And commission members, moments ago, Paul indicated the materials that have been sent to you. We encourage you to keep a digital library of those materials. They really do represent a building block in terms of our program. First, I'd like to touch on some of the benefits that were part of the affinity groupings document. And as we looked at that affinity grouping document, here we're only going to present some of the themes and how they rolled up and the frequency. But as you look at that, you're going to get a wide perspective on how large our mission is and the many things it affects, including benefits here related to economic growth, community connection, job creation, access to job market. Further, we you identified benefits in areas that are shown, and I should have noted that the numbers following each item are the frequency, that affinity groupings. We're looking at things ranging from environmental impact to quality of life, tourism. You see the connection between many of these. Obviously, transportation, the benefits of investing in our system have a wide range of positive impacts on our community. But we also considered and asked you about the consequences of inaction, looking at what would happen if we're not able to provide the transportation system, the improvements in the mobility, major effects relative from your perspective on economic impacts, the deterioration of the infrastructure, and the problems associated with that, including longer range costs, as well as lost jobs and impacts relative to safety. Consequences of inaction continue to range things like access to medical care. And as we looked at the results, it was encouraging to see there was so much perspective in terms of how transportation literally connects with all aspects of our lives, including our physical wellness. We asked about some major considerations that should be factored into the work of T-Roc. And it was encouraging to see that equitability or equity rose to the top in terms of being mentioned frequently. We've seen so many trends in our society that recognize that transportation is one area of problem solving where we must address equity and access of opportunity. We're going to see opportunities here as well, considerations of benchmarking what's happening in other states, looking at changes in technology, such as electronic and unmanned vehicle. And we also heard things in terms of PennDOT's operating structure, how that ties in with the overall strategy, and much about modes in the full list of major considerations. Okay. You may recall we also provided a baseline consideration in terms of how we might approach our analysis and our ultimate recommendations. And we put up a mode by mode consideration of as a way of evaluating the revenue needs and how they would be met. We also got some limited feedback in terms of looking at things rather than by mode, by funding streams instead, and several suggestions about making sure we did a regional analysis as well. We talked later on in the first meeting about guiding principles. What do we do beyond what's in the executive order in terms of creating that glue, that cohesion as the T-Roc? And the emphasis primarily was on making sure that the input that was received was used, that it was factored into the ultimate recommendations, that we consider impact on citizens, as well as cost and sustainability. So we do have some guiding principles that can help even ultimately form a charter or some other organizing principles as needed. Finally, the Q&A document was mentioned. You may recall that in the chat room were a series of questions. Those questions have been well answered by the department. That document has been provided back to you. Conceivably, there would be more Q&A today, and we would continue building on what's in the chat room and providing quick responses to your questions. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Keith. No need to adjust your set. We blurred that just because it's not terribly private, but we just thought we would show you the general idea. I believe it was 4 pages of that spreadsheet. So here's what we've waited for, the T-Roc survey results, the first result of which is that 36 people participated in the survey. We will acknowledge right up front that it was an extremely tight timetable to get to a survey. It was not particularly time consuming to do. At one point I saw the average time to complete was 9 minutes and 11 seconds or something like that. But it was really jammed into the last several days. So we extended that to 2 o'clock yesterday and have been crunching numbers since. But we greatly appreciate it's not by any means your last opportunity to give that input, but we thought that this meeting would be well served by having some baseline information. What we're going to do is a first pass at some of the major findings of the survey. some numerical information, both related to dollars and to the level of support on a 5-point scale, 1 to 5, that came out of the survey. That may change over time, but this is a sort of baseline from the 36 respondents. And we've organized this in a couple of different ways. The first thing we're going to look at here, the mileage-based user fee. We know this is something that is quite complex. It's going to be very demanding in terms of analysis, in terms of considerations of how to go about approaching it and so forth. But we wanted to just initially put it out here as a survey result. And it doesn't look very good when you put it on a scale with everything else, quite frankly, because it stretches the scale out vertically and everything else looks like a shadow. So what you have here with the mileage-based user fee, which the way it has been posed is it might represent some nearly $4 to over $8 billion. And I'm going to run through these results, then come back to some of these key items and invite your invite your input on that. So just so you understand, the level of support is on the 5-point scale of the survey. We didn't ask about timeline or anything like that, but just the sense of priority as to whether this would be a component of the recommendations. What is its potential? Another one that really jumped out, and again, a little difficult to put on a scale with some of the other information that came in, is that of accelerating the PSP deduction or reduction in funding. The way that has been posed actually stretches from some 32 million, but accelerated in green here, depending on the rate of acceleration, up to some $673 million. The level of support for that item was quite high. That was one of our top vote getters, if you will, in terms of a way to start to meet, a way to begin to address some of the funding shortfall. Going to come back to these, so you don't have to memorize these as we go. There are 3 major revenue sources. In fact, after you take the mileage-based user fee, and I'll start throwing MBUF around here soon, but when you take that big one off the scale here, the next 3, these purple columns, are full tolling, and it's described there as it was in the survey as the statewide tolling of interstates and expressways, of course, requiring federal authority. Now we're mixing 2 different sets of data for your consideration. The scale runs commensurate with the dollar value here. So this one is coming in, we picked the midpoint between the 1.8 and the 2.9 billion. It's a little arbitrary, but just so that we could do an apples to apples comparison across these options, we just picked the midpoint of the range that was provided. So that's what's showing on the vertical. The data label that comes on the top is the level of support in the survey. So back to that 5-point scale, you see that the full tolling, 3.13, a bit higher than that, the vehicle registration fee, and we will deal with that indeed, but it's a big dollar number when you stretch from 750 million to $1.5 billion. That had a 3.5. And then the 3.84 relates to congestion pricing, the level of support for tolling interstates in the big metropolitan areas or the bigger metropolitan areas. So that's, I'll pause there for a moment. We're going to come back and deal with all of these in a kind of rational, logical sequence, but I think it's best to kind of run through the landscape of all these options first. We'll be bringing that back to you. The mid-range revenue sources, and these just all kind of gathered around that 400 and some million dollars down to a bit over approaching $250 million. And so you don't need me to read these to you, but I'll let you look through the descriptors. And remember, the data label on top, don't let it fool you. It's the level of support as reflected by survey results. going to move us on, and we're going to return to these. And as I'm making the case, we're going to deal with them all in a very straightforward manner. The remaining, it's kind of picking up where we just left off from that a little above 120 million with the real ID kicking in, all the way down to some that frankly don't even show up the aircraft registration fee at $250,000 or so. I guess the midpoint of 300,000 is not going to show up on that scale. And you can see as well the level of support. So as a typical example, that transportation network company fee, getting to the Ubers, the Lyfts of the world, highly supported. It's not an enormous amount of money, but it's not insignificant either in that 90 million as a midpoint range. So to take another cut at that data, because that was everything. We actually just saw everything except the open-ended questions that people put in. We're going to start back with the big one, the mileage-based user fee. So same slide you saw before, came in at that pretty high level of support, 3.63. And of course, it is enormously significant relative to dollars. And we thought we would get the process started by going to the Mentimeter option. That should be open now. And we started with just a time scale. So you can simply enter, and there will be a few more questions about this one too, some open end. But what do you think the potential is from there is none to somewhere in the short term? And I should probably define short term here, and we'll do this a couple of times today, probably in that next 4-year horizon. So if you think about like 2 tips, for those of you familiar with that, which our commission members are, transportation improvement programs, 2 of those at 4 years. That's really the question. That would be a short term. Long term would be beyond that. It would be the horizon beyond that kind of 4-year cycle for planning. And if you have any trouble, I'm going to drop I think I still have it in the clipboard. I'm going to drop that Menti into the chat again, just in case that got away from you, but should be there. Yeah, there should be just one question up right now. So there really is only one question. So the next question will come if you've already answered. If you have any trouble with that, as someone did, you may just put it into chat and we'll combine those results later. Do a little cleanup on that.
And Paul, as we're getting started, if you would confirm for the group that they can find the Menti in the chat room, in case anyone's still looking for that.
I just entered it again in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
This first time, we usually take a little bit more time with this just to see how many folks we have weighing in. Seeing 27 now. And we'll just give this another few seconds. We won't drag this out. With 28 in, which I think was about where we ended up last time around as well. Wouldn't mind breaking 30. We have 2 more questions about this one. I'll give it a 10-second warning here. And if your device or your browser is waiting for us to advance, I'm about to do that. Few folks thought there is really no potential for it. And 7 in the short term. A lot of people think it's a long-term proposition. I would suggest as well here that we are planning to do some work to have a presentation. It'll be in one of our second May meeting from some experts in this arena. But we wanted to get it started just the same today. And so this is really just open question if you want to, or open item. We're not going to try to answer questions directly, but by all means, if you want to go to Menti, it should be refreshed now as well. You should be to the next question. I'm just calling this open forum on mileage-based user fees. Your ideas, your thoughts, but you may skip that entirely and raise your hand so that we'll know you are willing to speak with us directly, and I'll keep an eye on the order in which hands come up. So they go to the top in this nice platform. Love to hear from people. All perspectives welcome.
Members can make multiple entries as well.
Yep. You're unlimited there. You can keep that input coming. There was mention there of the pilot in the 95 corridor. I certainly invite if one of our commission members has a level of familiarity with that and wants to take, we're going to hear a lot about this one as we move forward, but we can certainly take a minute or two to hear about that. If anyone happens to know, can kind of crowdsource you on your ideas there. Definitely seeing a theme of how this is a matter of being interconnected with lots of other states, maybe nationally. We have some of these may take us a little bit of research after the fact. You know, the lessons learned from states that have tried to use it to generate the revenue. You have privacy concerns. You have the cost of implementation. Maybe you can jump on Easy Pass. I don't see any hands up. If I've missed anyone, unmute and speak with us. I'm going to do a quick jump to the top and then just give you a look at, we really have about 3 screens worth of ideas here. So do a quick speed reading. Yeah, thanks, Ken, that there are 3 states actually working toward, actually have some programs open. And so we can look into that. Just move us down to the next set of answers there. And as always, the chat questions will not be lost. Certainly if department support folks here have answers, they'll try, but we're going to certainly take them into the after the meeting effort to research those out. I'll just give you the the last few of these. Great balanced perspectives here. I put in here a third Mentimeter on this, but I think a lot of what came from that one, this is the third and final, I think a lot of what just came up in the prior answers does suggest areas of research, of information that you really need to get your hands on. But if there's anything else and you weren't thinking in that mode and you want to enter anything else here about what else you might need to know, knowing now as well that we'll have a presentation in May, we're really going to have to flesh out an understanding of this one. So, but if there's anything else that you think we need to know, there you go. You can pop your ideas in there at present. As always, we have absolutely no idea of knowing who said what in these mentees. You just get little colorful boxes around what you said, and the platform doesn't even allow that. So reminder of the anonymity of this process. I will leave that open because some people might have some other research. Of course, that's always fine to put that in the chat, but I'll leave that open, and then I can still take us back to the presentation proper, if you will. And this is the one we looked at before, kind of pulled it and the MBUF off the top. This is the proposed or the thought process about accelerating the reduction in PSP funding. Its support level was extraordinarily high, 4.3 on the 5-point scale. So this one kind of jumped out at us. So as you take that into account, we're going to go right back to Menti, and here I will have to advance it. So get your last thoughts on the prior one in there. And this is really just wide open. Again, you're welcome to unmute and chat with us. You are commission members, but how should the T-Roc address? I made that as wide open as possible. How should it address the reduction? And obviously the proposal was for an acceleration of that reduction. What are people's thoughts on that, of the Pennsylvania State Police funding piece? We'll just give this one another moment or two.
Paul, are all of these coming up on the screen? Because I sent my chat and it's not here.
Yeah, so did you send it into the Mentimeter?
No, I send it to everyone.
Yeah, and everyone will also see the Mentimeter. So what we'll do after the fact, we're keeping an eye on the chat. So we will combine those after the fact, but for the moment, to get it onto this screen here, you'd use the Mentimeter connection there.
Okay,
And that you can open in your browser, a telephone, if you wanted with a smartphone. It's a little tricky to key things in on a phone that way. But we will not lose anything that came in on the general chat. So no worries there if you have any trouble accessing the Mentimeter platform.
thank you.
Thank you. So as you look at these ideas, we had a couple of ideas there that kind of went to vigorous support and vigorously making the case. So it's great to see some energy around some of these ideas, and just a really a wide range of ways to do it. Here's a reference to a California model with a highway patrol fee. There are others, some would even shift it to municipalities. Not everyone would do that, surely. Get it to the general fund, and this one suggests a partnership with PSP on that message. Good work from the PSP, but where is the appropriate place for it to receive its funding?
Paul,
Yes.
would it be difficult to ask the Pennsylvania State Police to provide accounting for those transportation-related activities as opposed to general service activities?
Kind of sequester what the funds are actually, or what the activity and the costs therefore are going to. Does anyone have any experience with that? I think we can certainly take that into.
Paul, this is Keith. I'll put the tax study of a few years ago on this topic into the chat room, and it does get into that issue.
Hey, Paul, this is Ted. A couple years ago, the LBNF did a study on that. This has questioned the highway-related activities of the state police, and they actually came up with a figure and a percentage, I believe, in the report. So that was the LBNF, I think maybe 3-4 years ago.
Okay. So the budget and finance folks have looked at that budget and finance and where it went. So
I'll put both links in the chat room.
thanks, Keith. Excellent. Okay.
Paul, this is Bob Latham. Can you hear me?
Indeed we can, Bob. Yep. Loud and
Yeah,
clear.
it's important to understand that Legislative Budget and Finance Committee report, the only data included in that was from Troop T on the Turnpike. So it is a pretty flawed study. Does not have the rest of the state police data in it. It was requested, but it was not provided.
Thank you, Bob.
I can't speak to the TAC report, but I think there are some flaws in the Legislative Budget and Finance report. It's only related to Troop T, which only talks about is only the Turnpike data. And of course, a lot of Troop T's Turnpike, since they're dedicated to Turnpike, most of their work is transportation. So I think that to get a better handle on that, you'd have to go back and get complete data.
Thank you, Bob. Great clarification. I think we have a lot to work with here. And does anyone else want to make a point vocally? All right.
Well, thanks, Dave. One of the big parts of the state police operating number that comes out of there, and it's always been kind of hard to figure out, has been the cost of their pension contributions. That's a bit, because there aren't a whole lot more troopers now than there were 20 years ago, but their costs have exponentially grown. So taking an exploration as to how the PennDOT or how the state police money is allocated inside the department is probably really super important.
Thanks, Dave. I will leave that one open because I'll jump back to the regular PowerPoint. My screen lets me. And I wanted to give you another cut of the survey data. So what we have done with this is set up a scale that runs up to $3 billion. And we show against that scale the top 5 ideas in terms of support. These were all in that 4, kind of the 4 out of 5, except the MBUF. We pulled that out. We dealt with it rather separately. But what you see here are the other top 5 ideas, taking MBUF out of it. And obviously, when you get to something like the electric car fee at $7.3 million, it's just a little layer on top. Now, we actually just organized these from big to little vertically, just so they would be easy to read. They're all about the same level of support. So these were the things that got the highest level of support: congestion pricing, the vehicle sales tax increase, the charge to, the fee to the network companies, the Ubers, the Lyfts, a vehicle rental fee coming in at some 80 million, and then that electric car fee, again, modest numbers for that one just now. Those together come up to about let's round it to $1.4 billion. When you take in the next 5, I'm going to say most popular, most highly supported by the survey, you get the big one there. That vehicle registration fee kind of carries a lot of the number there. At the midpoint is the $1.1 billion. Then you've got an excise tax on goods delivery, which was floated at a 400 million. Limited tolling, and we're going to pull out and look at 3 major tolling options together. We're going to kind of go through those in a group. A little bit from tire tax and a little bit from driver license photo fee increase. So we thought it was helpful to just look at those things that were supported most by the folks here. That second set of 5 ran up to close to 2 billion, and the total number for all 10 put together, again, this is taking MBUF out of the picture, we'll call it $3.3 billion. So it was just another cut at the data to provide perspective. And then I'll just pop these little bits of information up here. So this just lets you take a quick look at what in fact was in the top 5 that we just looked at, in case you wanted to refresh yourself on the increases or the establishment of a fee in the case of an electric car. And then the tolling, and we'll look at that separately. So when we turn our attention back to input here, the question that we put up, and we're gonna deal with that big one that was in the second set of 5, the vehicle registration fee increase. Same scale we asked before. What do you think the potential is? Is it in this planning horizon of 4 years? Is it beyond that? Is it not going anywhere? There will be an open-end one about this as well for color commentary.
Paul Caulfield, this is Mark Compton. Can I ask a quick question?
Hi, of course, Mark.
If you go back to the previous slide where you talk about the electric vehicle tax.
I can do that even while the voting is going, Mark. We have the power here.
My assumption is that is not, to your point, mileage based. Is that a one-time annual assessment on the, not this one, but on the electric vehicle?
Oh, on the electric vehicle, I'm sorry. This little one up at the top, Mark.
Correct. Is that an annual fee that does not include a mileage based fee? It's just a one-time annual fee. Is that correct?
Ask for some help from our department researchers out there, where did that 150?
That is a one-time fee, yes. Much like a registration fee, yes.
And what year is that projected to? Would that just be next year, just with the assumption that this is clearly a growing market?
It is on the current numbers. So yes, very small compared to what it could be in the future.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
This is Stan Saylor. That on that fee that was listed of $150 to $200, that's only about half of what most people in Pennsylvania pay in gas taxes. So again, that fee is ridiculously low.
Hi, Josiah.
What's up?
Hi, are you listening to this thing? They're talking about this being a one-time registration. It's an annual registration fee.
Yes, I'm sorry, annual, but not based on mileage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so once a year, yes, sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. And then if
least
anyone's
I'm-
having any side conversations, if you could please mute.
All right.
Paul, this is Stan Saylor.
Thanks.
You hear me?
Yes, indeed.
That fee for the electric cars is way off. That is half of what people who pay the gas tax right now are paying. There's no way the General Assembly should ever pass a fee that's half of what everybody else is paying for electric cars. That's kind of crazy. You're losing a lot of revenue. And how do you tell somebody who drives whether you call it a hybrid car or a gas, anything else, that they're only going to, depending on the car you purchase. And once you set a fee like that politically, it's just like registration we're talking about right now. You're voting on the registration fee. The biggest problem with raising the registration fee, it was discussed when we did Act 89, was the political consequences for people who vote to raise the registration fee. I mean, we surely have the lowest one, I think, probably in the country. Maybe other than Maryland, it's probably pretty close to us. But that's one that I think is very politically sensitive, because if you probably were to raise the registration fee in Pennsylvania where it needs to be, it probably needs to be about $250. But if you send that bill out for PennDOT that goes from $36 or $38 a year to $250, you're going to have a riot on your hand. So I just think we have to be realistic when we're putting numbers up here, that the electric car really needs to be about $350 to $380, and also understand probably the solution, I don't disagree, is with the vehicle registration fee is probably where we should be looking at. But at the same time, I will say that is a real political hot button, just so everybody's aware.
Well, this is Mike Carroll. One observation, and I don't have to debate this here in this forum, but the electric vehicle registration fee that I've envisioned and put into a House bill does index the fee. So it would be increased over time and wouldn't require a separate vote of the General Assembly. And as I recall, we did index the reg fees in Act 89 on the rest of the fleet as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Representative. Yeah, and this forum, it is indeed a viable forum for folks speaking up and talking about these refinements to these ideas. So that was quite valuable to us. Thank you very much.
This is Bob Latham. I'm going to jump in. Maybe you can include, at least in the research, I believe Oklahoma and maybe some other states are looking at kind of a combination of registration fee and a gross receipts tax that would be applied when we build out all these electric vehicle public charging stations. So there's maybe you want to just add that in as a potential way to get the number up with, without having it all be on registration fee. And when Act 89 was passed, I think one of the theories of keeping registration fees low was that vehicles that the more you drive, the more you pay in gas tax. So the registration fee was sort of an entry into the system, but sort of the use of the system is based on how much you drive. I know that's a little difficult to do with electric vehicles, but anyway, there are states that are looking at, kind of combinations there, maybe something to be considered by the commission.
Yeah, this is Howard Cohen. When you do get your car inspected, you get the annual mileage increase noted. And so you could put the electric car fee and adjust it for mileage on an annual payment basis.
No, it's more complex than that. There's a lot of people just drive straight through with an electric car and you never charge them $1. Also, charging electric cars isn't free. I mean, it costs money to put that charge in there. And we don't have access to that number to put some tax or something on the cost of charging the electric bill. It's more complex than just charging a set fee on an electric vehicle. And they're different for trucks and everything, and that's coming as well.
Thank you, Ron. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this, which might have some favorability as to a relatively short-term option? Any other things we should kind of bring into consideration here? Great conversation.
This is George Wolf.
Hello, George.
It seems to me that the legislature anticipated alternate energy back about 97 and passed a piece of legislation directing the Department of Revenue to set up a taxing structure for all the alternate energy, which they did, but we don't collect it. And so somehow I think we ought to be having meters at all the charging stations that collect the tax that is supposed to be collected for the kilowatt hours that go in to replace to charge the batteries instead of putting gasoline in, and you're getting electric in. And I think that the registration fee should be down low, and the charge be put on what you're using, so that that you reflect what is being used rather than just because you own it.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, but to pick up on Ron's point on complexity, many people who have electric vehicles, at least the 3 or 4 that I know, anecdotally have home chargers, so they charge their car at night. And this is a complicated piece, and the revenue department should be involved in it. The other point on increasing the registration fee, there is a good argument to be made that you want people at the low income level to get a deduction or an exemption. We can figure out how to do that so that people at the lower economic end don't get hit with a registration fee that is regressive. And that is doable to the extent that people at the lower end file Pennsylvania income taxes.
Thank
you, Howard. I want to jump in and second that and just say that for low-income people, incremental taxes via the gas tax are actually easier to absorb than a one-time heavy registration fee for electric vehicles or the vehicle registration fee increase. And I've just been putting comments in the chat about concerns that electric vehicle fees will disincentivize or electric vehicle usage, and would be interested in seeing if there's any modeling about how that would impact adoption.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, this is Dan Hassel. I just wanted to address the questions about collecting the current alternative fuels tax. It's correct that the revenue department doesn't do a lot to collect the tax that's due from individuals, and the reason is that it would be very small dollar amounts and a complicated administrative process to enforce, and it really would be not worth the trouble of the small amount of revenue that's outstanding for $1 or $2 that might be due from an individual with a home charging station. So we do get alternative fuels tax from commercial entities that have charging stations. So there is some revenue collected, but to do that for the homeowner is really prohibitively expensive.
Thank you, Secretary Hassel. I did open up the open forum on the vehicle registration. You can talk about anything you like. We will sort it out after the fact, but did get some ideas rolling in as well on that vehicle registration fee, which of course relates to, electric vehicle registration. And that led to our fruitful conversation about other implementation concerns. Leave that one open for a moment on vehicle registration fee. It represents a sizable contribution to the gap, to spanning that gap.
Ron Drunovich, the biggest gap by far is a deteriorating gas tax that eventually will disappear. And it might take 15 years for that to happen, but it's going faster and faster, especially with the drive for electric cars in this country. The big nut we're trying to solve is that $8 billion piece that's missing, as well as about $4 billion of gas tax that's already being used. So we can talk about 200 million or 700 million, and that's all important stuff. But the problem to solve, if we're going to get rid of the gas tax, which is going to go away by itself, has got to be something that's big, and that's the vehicle mileage tax or tolling or whatever you want to call it. And that isn't just Pennsylvania that's got that problem. All the states do. The federal government has that problem because they have a gas tax at the federal level, 18 cents. It's going to just continue to deteriorate. This is a big picture item that it isn't just us, it's the entire country that's got to deal with it somehow. We really should know what other states are thinking about. It would be nice to be on the front edge of all of this and be bold about it. And that's not easy to do, especially when there's so many constituents with special interests involved. I don't mean to downplay it, but we need to jump on it and grab the big nut first and then fill it in with all those other pieces that are listed. And they're all good if they're transportation or vehicle related. And always the big check is, what are we doing with the stuff that's going right through the country? And how do you get a vehicle mileage tax on something that goes from one end of the state to the other? And there's a way to do that. That's technology that we're not going to address, but it sure as heck can be done. And I think all the little things are good, but the big nut is the one that's the really focus, I think, of T-Roc here. How to recover from no gas tax.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, I will leave that open, and we'll jump back. I got a little ahead. When we looked at some of the other priorities, we broke that into the top 5 and then the next 5. I just wanted to put that back up here. Little ones, maybe to Ron's point of a few moments ago, tire taxes and driver license fees. Maybe they're easy to be supportive of. They don't plug the gap the way we obviously need to do. But you'll see in here the limited tolling kind of made the mark here in the top 10 as well. And so we're going to take a look now as we go back into this Mentimeter process. We're going to take a look at really 3 different components that were all in the survey of tolling related revenue generation. So the first of these is one we'll call congestion pricing. It's the tolling of interstates and expressways. The midpoint of that projected number was $712 million. For reference, the support level from the survey was 3.84. And we just want to use this start to get people thinking about what's it look like to you as an option. Not short, long-term. And we'll go through all 3 of the tolling options and then have a very open forum.
And Paul, short-term, 3 to 5 years?
We're going to call it, say that 4 year. So yes, we'll call it like that 4-year horizon. The next 2 tips from the department's perspective, and then long-term out beyond that 4-year horizon. Mark. I had a high water mark of 32, so I hope we haven't lost anyone. I realize if you're on the phone that it's not going to work that easily for you. You're traveling. All right. We set these up really 3 in a row. So what we can do is do the polling on the next 2 as well, then look at all 3 and then have the open forum. The next cut at this is the limited tolling of bridges and then new capacity express lanes. So if you're building a new lane, you designate that as one that would be tolled, so that someone can opt to use it. That one came in at about 370 million as the midpoint, and support level 3.4 into your consideration. Now, this is across the state, so bridges and those new capacity express lanes. And I see in the chat the question of they're 2 separate ideas. I know this is the way the option was rolled out originally, Rebecca, in the information provided, and we kind of maintained that for the survey. But I think it's a great point if you mean the tolling of bridges as one thing, of express lanes as another. So I just want to be aware of that comment in the chat. Thank you. Okay. And again, we can come back to all of these, and we will, but there is the third that relates to the same general topic. This is the full tolling. Now you're talking $2.25 billion to $3 billion. Pardon me, little over 3 support. Coming down to our last few entries on that. Give you a 10-second last call. So to look back through, I'm going to go back to the data that just came in, and we'll just go to we'll go 2 back. So we first looked at the congestion pricing in those places of interstates and expressways, the 700 million, the 3.8 support. I guess the data kind of leaned toward a long-term option. Few no potential votes there, and some short termers. The limited tolling of bridges and new express lanes, again, that is the way it was packaged. No one saw it as no potential in our initial voting there. 23 as a short-term proposition. And I can always go back to these if you want, a much more kind of balanced view of whether it has any potential at all to short-term to mid-term for a full tolling. This is one we certainly want to hear T-Roc members talk about, discuss their perspective. I'll put up an open forum Mentimeter, just if you have an idea and you want to put it in there, you may. But as always, we really appreciate if you unmute and chat with us. You can even show us your video if you like, if you're not shy this afternoon. You can even raise your hand and we'll recognize you, though some of you are quicker than I am with the hand and speaking.
Hi, Paul. This is Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
I just want to follow up on my my comment about the difference between limited tolling of bridges and express lanes. I think that's a really important distinction because on one hand, if you're talking about limited tolling and the bridge tolling that we've been discussing, and I think that it's important to point out that that's tolling what's currently a public good. Whereas if you're talking about express lane tolling, there, I think that's more appropriately described as a choice or an option that a commuter would make, which they would pay for. So I think those two issues are completely separate, and I didn't rank them. I didn't respond to that question because I just don't think you can include them in the same, the same question.
Yeah, if we had separated them, Rebecca, do you have a sense of that? I mean, I think I can infer that from what you just said, but just maybe to keep the conversation going, what is your sense? And we appreciate your representation of that industry too. What is your sense of what makes sense there?
Sure, I don't have an issue with discussing tolls that are provided on a choice or an option that a traveler would have on the interstate. In that case, they're paying for something, an extra good that they're getting out of the system. But to tax or toll an interstate, that's currently free, that's currently a public good that I think we all pay taxes for currently, I don't think that is fair, especially to those industries like ours that are traveling, those roads and bridges that are really gonna disproportionately impact them. Whereas if you provide them the choice to travel an express lane and ask them to pay for that choice, I think that's fair.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I was hoping that I understood the distinction you were trying to make with the chat, but sure is good to hear it from you. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Who else would like to follow suit and weigh in on this enormous item? Lots of good stuff coming in through the Mentimeter as well. An interesting perspective over here that full tolling kind of to the end user, to this entrant, kind of looks like that whole MBUF proposition.
This is Howard Cohen. I have been thinking about what Rebecca Euler said, and I am troubled by the inclusion of an interstate as a public good. I am not so sure that that is A, good economics or good public policy. It is a user good defined by those that travel it or drive on it. And I'm not so sure that I'm not so sure we shouldn't challenge and discuss at some point, maybe later, as to whether highways are public goods or not.
Thank you, Howard. A lot of energy around this one. Certainly appreciate. Becomes quite philosophical. Does anyone else care to weigh in on that element of it or any of the other components here? I'll just scroll back up here quickly. And I'll just show you what else came in. Thank you, Melissa, for your comment, just why those were paired, having to do even at the federal legislation level, and very much understood the importance of distinguishing. Okay. All right, I think I better give it a few more seconds. They're still coming in. Very good. There are so many items here that are thought-provoking. I really don't feel like I should cherry pick any of them. There's just a lot to digest there. Great input from the commission members. And every time I think I'm going to move on, something else comes in like that. So I'll give it the 10-second call here because I have some other matters to discuss. All right. This is a little bit of cleanup on some of the highly supported, but not huge components of the solution, if you will. So we just wanted to make sure we didn't ignore the electric car fee. And I think we kind of covered that one anyway. Vehicle rental fee, the network companies fee, and the vehicle sales tax increase. It's just wide open on those items that did make the list. You can certainly talk with us about those things as well. We may have covered some of these as a byproduct of addressing other questions. I get creative. I appreciate this comment, especially if I was the one that might have downplayed it, just trying to give perspective to the data, but I do appreciate that comment. It being a wave of the future obviously plays a role. I'm going to do a scroll back to the top. It's a good ways up there. Let you take a look at what has come in, quite varied. You have some reflection on how things may hit people disproportionately. Philadelphia, for instance. The idea that popped up here about an infrastructure fee on all goods bought and sold also made the list, and indeed it might have been from our same commission member, for other alternatives. We were somewhat amazed at how many other ideas came in, and that was as of just yesterday. So just beginning to sort that out, and we'll share them with the commission members. And let's see what else we have here. Wow. Somebody offset the idea of kind of maxing out on the sales tax. Okay. There's a lot to look at there, a lot to digest. Does anyone want to make a comment vocally?
This is George Wolf again.
Hey, George.
Maybe it's just being an old farmer and knowing that if you don't have enough money to feed the cow or to buy the plant, buy the seed, you aren't going to farm long. And I remember that last November, the department said they were out of highway money. So we also need to be looking at how do we do a short-term thing to get money into the department so they can repair the roads and do what needs to be done now. And I think that gives an opportunity to look at getting some of the COVID money because hypothetically, some of the revenue loss was because people weren't driving and because we had to shut down. So it seems to me that that's one of the things. But this almost sounds today like we have a tutorial on the old highway department funding thing, not the Department of Transportation, because the last meeting we had, they talked about the importance of the seaport and the rails and the airports and everything. Well, that's very important, all of them. But it seems to me that right now, almost today, we ought to be getting a plan as to how do we work in Washington to make sure that the Surface Transportation Act that has to be reenacted by October of this year provides the funding and the long-term thought and financial base that we need for all of those things plus highways. And so it just seems to me that we're looking ahead when we may not have a cow to milk anymore.
Thank you, George. These are some others that were highly supported that we did not deal with directly because we split out some of the real big ones and we split out as well the tolling related ideas, increase in driver license fee, tire tax, excise tax on goods delivery. There were just three others. And I know a lot of folks said in the prior screen, it has to be a whole portfolio, if you will, a kind of balanced portfolio to find opportunities everywhere. But just in case you have specific thoughts about these three, varying levels. Somebody's already given thought to that. Excellent. Somebody in our waiting room. There we go.
Size.
And some of these are questions that we will have to kind of look into, potentially benchmark with other states. Keep them coming though. Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to call this one in about 10 seconds. We're trying to be very comprehensive, and we have just a little bit more to weigh in on before we open it up completely. Just get a few more in here. And you can, of course, keep, and I do appreciate the lively conversation by chat as well. A lot to keep track of here. Thank you. All right. When we looked at the data, there were several items. They have some commonality, as you will see on this list. But we thought, to be comprehensive and to be fair, we should address them together. So these 4 areas, they're fairly high revenue generating options, you know, and next to them, parenthetically, is how much that is. They're all in the kind of same order of magnitude. They got very limited support. So these were fairly low on the support. I'm sure you noticed some of these when we went back through the graphs earlier. This is just a wide open question. Do we pursue them? Do we not pursue them at all? 4 of them to weigh in on, of course. We're about halfway there. Votes are almost in. That's our number. So the grand winner just kind of came up to the mid-range. That was a corporate income tax increase. The projection was some, 300 million as the possible dollar amount there. Our votes were somewhat polarized with 11. Somebody skipped, but with 11 all the way at one end of the scale, do not pursue, and 10 pursuing it with a full 10, and few in between along the way, but this one was somewhat, I think we could say, polarizing. I'm going to run through all these and invite conversation about it. When we came to the personal income tax, the pit heavily skewed to the left. Sales tax increase certainly skewed to the left. A handful of people went high on that. And real estate transfer tax did not get a lot of broad support. There were some outliers, and you can have that. That's with our number there.
Paul, it's Howard Cohen again.
Thanks, Howard.
All of these four taxes would go to general revenue receipts. And that would beget the question that we would then have the Department of Transportation fighting among all the other requirements for funding in the general budget. There is, I think, a bias among those of us that are on this board or commission to favor transport-related fees and charges and user fees rather than general revenues, where the legislature does its annual budget and allocations. So I'm not so sure any of these beget any help to the PennDOT needs. They all go to the needs for general revenue in the Commonwealth, which admittedly is a real problem. And I'm not so sure any of these helps the work of this group, given its charge.
Thank you, Howard.
Ron Drenovich, I absolutely agree with Howard. I think anything that we recommend ought to be focused on transportation related items, and whatever additional fees we're looking at, it ought to be transportation related activity of some sort.
Thank you, Ron.
But Paul, maybe the other side to that is, couldn't these taxes help make up that state police shortfall that's going to fall back to the general budget?
Yes, and that's the argument that should take place in the General Assembly, because unless you can allocate and audit state police costs to transportation, I don't think they should be dipping into the transportation revenues for state police general activities.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Howard and Drowning. So we'll let some other ideas come in here. We're doing really well on time. I have to reserve a little time toward the end in the case of public comment for those who could only access by telephone publicly.
Hey, Paul, and for what it's worth, transit is a general fund expense now. That doesn't come out of the motor license fund.
And just to state the obvious, there's a $400 million cliff that comes next June with respect to transit funding.
Thanks, Representative Carroll. And I think we can leave that one open because I think it's the last of our weighing in on the survey results and the options evaluated through the survey. So that'll still be open. A lot of good ideas coming in there. Appreciate that. We really, even if it's something that's not pursued, it clearly has to be considered. And the rationale, of course, has to be laid out. So Keith, I want to turn it over to you for a few moments and just kind of take a quick look here at what else came in through the survey. And there are 3 slides of that. These were coming in rapidly.
And thanks, Paul. This is just to remind the commission members, first of all, they did an outstanding job. As we constructed the survey, we asked the commission members to evaluate the options that you've been looking at for the past hour or so, but also to begin the hard work of identifying some new potential sources of funding. All we've done is to put these into some categories, and I promise you I won't read them, but I might highlight 1 or 2 while giving you a chance to look through this list, which we're going to provide back to you as a building block as well. The first category that we placed your responses into included user fees, several of them vehicle related, one of them carbon tax. Under the Commonwealth, some things that were statewide or policy related, notably as the taxes generated from the legalization of marijuana, the map appears to be changing very rapidly. I just checked recently, and it looks like there are 14 states now that have completely decriminalized. I shouldn't say completely. They've decriminalized marijuana. Many of those states are in the Northeast. So it does represent something that may be a movement. And however you look at this issue may need to be looked at as a source of revenue. Uncollected revenue as well as a perspective for the Commonwealth to close some of those leakages that potentially may be causing us to miss some revenue. On the private sector side, some of you are looking at things occurring in other places like the social media advertisement fee in Maryland. And we'll be looking at things in other states that may be part of the problem solving here. There was some reference earlier to whether or not we're multimodal. We are. And I would point out under local and regional, the suggestion of increasing tax on parking in cities as a way of creating funding, but also at the same time promoting public transit usage. And one of the ideas related to increasing local and county government tools and options for raising revenue. Okay, go on to the next, please. There are about 30 or so ideas that you provided. We've slotted several under individual, including one related to mobile device connectivity fee and e-commerce, which happens to be a theme that comes up frequently relative to delivery and the e-commerce landscape in general. Under federal, you have identified various policies, various bills that have already passed and how they may be part of the overall problem solving. Interesting, under public transit is the idea of looking at public-private partnerships where there's transit developments such as in intercity rail line. And there have been several articles recently that have underscored that there appears to be more investment on the horizon by Amtrak and the Biden administration in intercity rail. So that's timely. Bob Schaefer, you'll be happy to see here that there's some suggestion for relooking at some of the aviation fees as well to increase funds there. So that's a list. We'll provide it back to you. You did an excellent job in getting started on answering that open-ended question of what other sources we should be considering. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Keith. So we do want to carve out a few moments here. We were going to try to budget 10. We are still on track to do that. If any of the public would like to weigh in, we're asking you to limit your remarks to 3 minutes max. The questions and comments that are otherwise coming in from Ask a Question, they may be comments or questions, will certainly be recorded, captured for the commission's consideration and for the departments. But we can invite you to unmute and speak with us if you are a phone caller from the public or otherwise representing the public. And we would, of course, steer our media friends to the communications office for detailed questions and such. We won't wait 10 minutes to see if anyone unmutes. We will give it another few seconds. Okay. Not hearing any, because we really tried to limit that to the phone callers. We do want to give commission members a look ahead. We have a game plan to hear about the Pell and also a look at the ARTBA, we're going to have some representatives make some presentations to us in the second of our meetings this month. So those are being lined up. I think just before this meeting came on, we had confirmation that we would hear a rather extensive, or at least get into some of the technical matters and understand the state of practice relative to MBUF that we dealt with right up front in today's meeting from the Eastern Transportation Coalition. So that it is, that's going to be the second of our May meetings, it looks like. And of course, continue to evaluate the revenue alternatives. That is the job here, to look for opportunities to really make a difference. And now really opening it up to other commission member input. We just really invite people to, if you have some other information requests, things that you think might be sensible or helpful, other than what has been mentioned, for potential future presentations. And as I pop back over to the Menti, because that's how we can do that, just want to show you what has come in most recently on those tax increases. And then we'll move on from that. This is the general, it's really the what else slide in Menti. So if you have anything else, if you'll pop back over to the Menti, anything is fair game there before we turn it back over to your commission chair, Secretary Gramian. But you can unmute and talk. You can add items here. You could try some reactions out if you want to try that feature. We'd like to hear from you. Anyone wants to sum everything up?
This is Jeff from Pennsylvania still. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff.
Yes. Wanted to go back to something I posted in chat on uncollected revenue, and this would be something for a future meeting. Is, do we know where PennDOT stands on this? I'm thinking not just of Pennsylvania individuals and companies, but of course various states and even people from other nations use our, all of our transportation resources. What about things like lawsuits? Is there a lag? I'm not talking about what we're not collecting because of COVID, but just what's owed to us, where we've sent a bill, but we haven't collected it. The other thing is with the FAST Act reauthorization. I think George Wolk was alluding to that. And what does Pennsylvania want? Does the secretary and does the administration have a plan? Not just saying we need more money. Every state says that, but what's our plan? And again, it's something maybe down the road, and maybe this group can help to shape what the administration asks for to some degree. Thank you.
Indeed, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah. Good.
I do have a comment. Carl Singleton, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Diversity Coalition. I always want to echo, while I understand the real ID significance of that, or the revenue it could raise, I wanted to not be lost that we talked about things being politically charged in other areas. This is one of those things that is politically charged as well, as it relates directly from my perspective and a lot of people who look like me's perspective to voter suppression. So we need to make sure before we bring things up that we truly flesh it out and be cognizant of all possible influences and impacts that it could have. Just wanted to make that on record. I did put it in writing in the survey. I wanted to speak it into record as well.
Thank you, Carl. We'd rather hear from you also. Do appreciate that. Thank you. Well, Jeff and Carl have showed that it's painless. So if anyone else would like to speak with us, we have a few minutes we carved out for the public, and we didn't hear from them. So
this is Sarah Stewart from the Bicycle Coalition.
hi, Sarah.
Hi, I just wanted to, I put this in the chat also, but to put on the table a discussion about dedicated funding for transit. Is that something we're going to also try and cover or get into?
Well, I think you've put it on the table, and I think it will be for the commission to determine, whether that is something that ultimately makes its way into recommendations. Appreciated Mark's clarification on that a little while ago.
Thank you. I would like us to have a discussion about it and also to hear from the transit agencies. It's no secret that transit funding is difficult and complicated and needs a more stable source.
Thank you. And thank you, Nolan, for that clarification. Indeed, revenue options for all modes. So that certainly encompasses that, doesn't it? Thanks, Nolan. Who else? A lot of ideas. That's a little bit of research coming in here. Good. I will leave that open because that's really anything that occurs to you, even as we move toward our close here, you can still key in there. So I believe I recognize the picture here. So your commission chair, secretary.
Okay.
There we go.
Finally found the mute button.
They hide from me, so.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, Keith, great session. Thanks everyone for all your input today. As Paul mentioned, at our next meeting, which will be held on April 29th, we will have a presentation by American Road and Transportation Builders, ARPA, to give us an overview of what other states are discussing and implementing to address transportation funding. Also on the 29th, we have a presentation on the draft planning and environmental linkages, or PEL study, which is the study that's being conducted as part of the PennDOT Pathways program. We certainly have a lot coming up, and I thank you for your engagement in this process. But before we end, I will share my thoughts on how we can all support the commission in its work. Number one, participate actively as you've been doing today, greatly appreciated, especially as we start to evaluate various revenue options and then start framing some of those recommendations. Your participation and feedback is extremely important. Number two, communicate. Communicate with your various constituents, stakeholders, spheres of influence about the importance of our work for Pennsylvania now and for our future mobility and economic strength. Number three, speak with leaders at federal, state, and local levels. Solutions will be intergovernmental. Number four, think long-term and act short-term. We will develop a compelling strategic proposal that advances progress in the short term and is enduring in the long term. That's our hope. Continue to educate yourself. This is very important about this major issue at the national level and among other states. What are the other states doing? And we're open for you to bring on some of the stories from other states, as we're going to do next time. Be open-minded and broad-minded. There is no one silver bullet that will fix an antiquated funding structure. We will need to listen to a broad range of ideas and options without being too quick to be dismissive of any of them. Finally, these are times that demand creativity. Let us all think about some creative ways to develop our strategic proposal that makes its implementation not only feasible, but possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. And what I'll do is I'll just pop back over to the last of those ideas that came in. Definitely have some chat coming in. We have a lot of work to do to organize what came in. We have the recording, we have the chat, we have the Mentimeter inputs, and all of those will be drawn together. And I really appreciate some people helping to really give us some perspective today, that we address this problem, that we look long-term and really consider ways to make this work in a dedicated way for infrastructure. So really appreciate everyone's time today. You can thank the public for giving you 8 minutes back into your no doubt busy schedule. And it's been a pleasure, but signing off from T-Roc Studios, thank you again.